Time is money. I don't find this phrase particularly friendly. It brings to mind horridly impatient customers at Starbucks and the worst aspects of hustle culture. So, most of it. Hustle culture preaches the values of perpetual productivity. You have a hobby, you better monetize it. A few free hours each day, DoorDash and any number of pay-per-gig services are here to fill that time with money. Hustle culture has many issues beyond the scope of this essay, but one that pertains to the matter at hand is how it equates the value of our lives and our time with the amount of money we can trade them for. This insistence that time's only value is monetary. It ignores the quiet moments of our lives, the parts that are essential, the parts that are just being. But the concept of time as money goes much further than just hustle culture. Much of the language we use when discussing time overlaps with the vocabulary we use when discussing currency. We spend time with the people we love and on activities we enjoy. We perform tasks efficiently to save time. If we dislike how we've used our time, it's been wasted. Time's greatest similarity to money is its nature as a resource that should be carefully managed, especially because you never know when it will run out. The proper usage of personal time is something that I've considered a lot, especially as I've grown older. This is part of the reason why Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, resonates so powerfully with me. Frieren has entranced me since I first picked up the manga, and the recent anime adaptation has yet to disappoint. It has captured everything I loved about the story, and has done so with brilliant voice acting and beautiful animation throughout. Time, its passage, and how we use it is central to the story of Frieren. It's about Frieren, an elven mage who traveled with the party of heroes that defeated the Demon King. While that would be a fine story in its own right, as the title suggests, this story doesn't begin until that journey has ended. Frieren is a story steeped in regret and sorrow and joy and travel and home, maturity and heroism. All of these elements are tied together using time as the centerpiece for the story's thematic material. This video examines Frieren and its use of time, specifically in how it pertains to the deeply intertwined themes of maturity and regret. To do so, we first need to consider Frieren's perspective and the temporal dissonance it offers the story, and how the show uses this to craft a deeply human narrative from an innately inhuman perspective. To understand how Frieren, the story, utilizes time, we have to understand Frieren, the character, and her relationship to it. Thankfully, all of the context that we need to understand the character and her perspective on time is provided in the very first episode of the anime, so that's where our analysis will begin. The show opens with Frieren and her party, composed of herself, Himmel the hero, Heiter the priest, and Eisen the warrior, returning to the capital city after successfully defeating the Demon King, capping off a 10-year adventure. The return sparks much ceremony and celebration, with the heroes provided with all the food and booze they can consume under the Meteor-era shower, a celestial event that occurs once every half-century. Though this celebration is the reward for a journey well-traveled, it comprises relatively little of the episode. Though Frieren is a slow-burning fantasy that often takes its time, it has an incredible use of pacing and is capable of delivering plenty of information when required. It exercises this beautifully in this first episode, which ultimately traverses 70 years of story. Time flows ever onward, and so must our cast, though not before promising to reunite in 50 years for the next Meteor-era shower. Frieren parts ways with her companions shortly after the celebration, embarking on a journey through the Central Lands to collect folk magic. The ensuing montage lasts about 90 seconds, following Frieren through a variety of vivid vistas. Then she returns to the city to make good on her promise to her companions. Frieren is over 1,000 years old. The show frequently comments on her longevity.
まったく、いつから生きているのやら。50年も100年も彼女にとっては些細なものなのかもしれませんね。
Long-lived races, especially elves, are hardly a new concept in fantasy. What Frieren does that's so special is it captures Frieren's perspective. Stories containing these long-lived races are often told through mortal eyes, marveling at the longevity of the elves and their near immortality. But Frieren captures that perspective. It is solidly told through Frieren's eyes. The show hints at this as the montage goes on, 50 years flitting by while leaving Frieren untouched. But what drives the point home is her reunion with Himmel. Before the montage, we saw Himmel as the dashing hero immortalized in bronze statues across the land. But now, he's an old man, completely unrecognizable except for the luster in his eyes. And yet, Frieren is untouched. We barely noticed 50 years going by, but for Himmel, that was his life. We're as surprised as Frieren when we come face to face with this tiny old man. Frieren's other companions wear their age much better, but they all feel its passage and are all similarly horrified when they learn that Frieren's viewing spot for the meteor shower is a week's walk away. It doesn't take much time for it to become another adventure, a moment of nostalgia for the party to reflect on the journey that was and consider everything that's happened in these 50 years. Everybody is living for the nostalgia, except for Frieren.
短い間だったけどね。
短い？何を言ってるんだ？10年だぞ。
During the celebration, Frieren trivialized their journey, calling it a mere 10-year adventure that comprised so little of her life that it wasn't worth looking back on with sentimentality. This cold and rather immature perspective comes from Frieren's relationship with time. It's understandable. What's 10 years in the face of 1,000? Look at how quickly 50 passed us by. Time really is a trifling thing to one who never has to worry about it running out. There's a lot of conflict in the show derived from how Frieren's longevity impacts her relationship with time and how it contrasts with her mortal companions. We see this really clearly once Frieren starts traveling with Fern.
10年くらい滞在しちゃおうかしら。1週間までですよ。
This temporal dissonance is vital to Frieren's character and the show's thematic material. Consider for a moment what could have happened if this episode was told from the perspective of another character, maybe Himmel. Those 50 years wouldn't have flown by. Again, that was his life. It would have taken episodes to do it justice. Hell, the story of a hero retiring after defeating the Demon King and bringing about an era of peace could be an anime in its own right. But because we lean so heavily into Frieren's perspective, those 50 years are gone. Shortly after the party's journey to see the Meteor-era shower, Himmel the hero passes away. This moment hits Frieren really hard. It's not the first time she's known death. She's lived through 1,000 years of conflict between humans and demons. Her entire village was slaughtered. She was close with another human once, the legendary mage Flamme, who was Frieren's master and would have passed away centuries before Frieren would have met Himmel. But when Himmel dies, we see for the first time an outburst of emotion from our protagonist.
人間の寿命は短いって分かっていたのに。なんでもっと知ろうと思わなかったんだろう。
Frieren didn't bother to get to know Himmel during their journey because she didn't value human relationships or really his life. She never considered the human perspective on things and equated the value of their relationship directly to the amount of time that it occurred in proportional to his life. By never considering the other perspective, the human one, Frieren gave up her chance to get to know Himmel, despite how much he valued their friendship. The grief and regret kindled in Frieren by this moment become foundational to the show's story and thematic trajectory, which I examine in more depth in the next chapters. For now, Frieren resolves to get to know humans better as she travels around collecting her magic, to get to know the people as much as their spell. There's another time skip, and Frieren visits Heiter another 20 years later, and she meets his adopted daughter, Fern, an aspiring mage, who ultimately goes on to become Frieren's traveling companion and apprentice. Altogether, this episode covers 70 years of time in the story. It's breathtaking, honestly. It's perfectly paced, and it does so much to center us on Frieren's perspective and informs us exactly what kind of show this is going to be. The next couple of episodes also cover several years in quick succession. Frieren ends up staying with Fern and Heiter for a while, with Heiter tricking Frieren into training up Fern until she's a strong enough mage to travel and defend herself, which Frieren catches on to a little bit, but she goes through with it. Frieren and Fern meander for a little bit until Frieren decides it's time to visit Eisen. Now, don't take this meandering lightly. It is not a weakness, but one of the show's greatest strengths. The story of Frieren really lies in these meanderings, in taking the time to move around and following what you enjoy.
つられて笑ってしまったんです。きっと私はそんなフリーレン様の姿が好きだから、一緒に魔法を追い求めているんだと思います。
When Frieren asks Eisen if there's anything she can help him with, he makes her and Fern help him find Flame's notes, a tricky deal since many of the grimoires attributed to the legendary mage are fakes. Eisen wants to find these notes because he and Heiter researched them, knowing that Flame was supposed to be able to speak with the dead, and the pair of them wanted to help Frieren. They knew how much she regretted how she treated Himmel. They knew that she would want to do it again, which Flame also knew. As we learn, she left the notes specifically for Frieren. They reveal the existence of Ariol, the land where souls gather, where Flame spoke with long-lost companions. And it just so happens to be located on the northernmost end of the continent, exactly where the Demon King's castle is. This sparks the rest of the story going forward as we follow Frieren and Fern, and eventually the warrior Stark and the priest Sign, as they begin their journey north, following the path that the hero's party took to end, so that Frieren can get some closure and resolve her regrets with Himmel. So what does the story gain from clinging so hard to Frieren's perspective? At its heart, this is really a story about relationships, about what makes them meaningful, about love, and about loving others. Frieren's perspective gives a lot of context for how the show wants to explore these themes, especially the idea of enduring love and impacting other people's lives. The show demonstrates this in many ways, but the one that I want to focus on the most in this moment is how Himmel's death affects how Frieren feels about human relationships and relationships in general.
いろいろ教えてもすぐ死んじゃうでしょ。
フリーレン、人との関係はそういうものじゃない。
Frieren's assertion there that the fleeting nature of human relationships robs them of their meaning explains a lot of her coldness, really, and why she thought so little about spending 50 years wandering around. She didn't think Himmel was somebody that she would care about knowing, or probably even think about in another 100 years. Of course, his death changes her opinion on that. The realization that Frieren lost her chance to get to know Himmel, not to a monster attack or similar tragedy, but her own indifference, spurs her character arc. It also cements one of the show's prominent themes. The fleeting nature of human relationships does not rob them of their meaning, but is in fact what makes them beautiful and an important part of our lives. The people we encounter can have a monumental impact on our lives, regardless of the amount of time we know them. Frieren's mistake here is correlating the meaning and depth of a relationship with the amount of time it occurred over. But Himmel is a prime example of a character who's had an impact on many people despite knowing them for brief amounts of time. Many of the villages Frieren and Fern travel to remember Himmel coming to their village fondly. Not just for the whole killing the Demon King thing either. Himmel handed out aid to anybody who needed it. He made sure every merchant traveled safely, that even the most minor of monsters were slayed so that the villagers would be safe. He left not just so many bronze statues behind, but an enduring legacy of kindness that shows even a few moments can have a tremendous impact on the way people live. Sometimes you can even impact people when they don't know you directly. We see this with Werble, who, in a conversation that hasn't been animated yet, tells Frieren that he aspires to kindness because when the people of his village reminisced on Himmel the hero, they didn't think about him killing the Demon King or battling the 7 Sages of Destruction. They remembered his kindness, and so Werble wanted to be kind in turn. While Frieren utilizes time to weave this statement about the beauty and meaning of human relationships, its themes run far deeper. I think its most poignant uses of time are in relation to regret, maturity, and what it means to live a good life alongside the inexorable march of time. With its prominent theme of maturity, one could view Frieren, at least in part, as a coming-of-age story. We especially see this exemplified with Fern, whom we meet as a small child and watch grow into a young adult as the show progresses. Stark isn't much older than Fern when he joins the party, about 2 years, I believe. Despite the intense age gap, Frieren is certainly the most immature member of the party. Each member of the party has their own unique maturity levels and forms of maturity that are all worth discussing in depth. Of course, we're going to start with Frieren. Long-lived fantasy characters are often presented as sage mentors dripping with wisdom, rather like Gandalf. Frieren is a very good magic teacher as she specializes in the craft, but in her day-to-day life, she's surprisingly immature and selfish. It's worth noting that her selfishness is very childlike and almost innocent. She's not cruel or malicious, she just doesn't always think about how her actions can impact those around her. From this perspective, it makes a lot of sense to think of her selfishness as a symptom of her immaturity. An excellent example of this comes in episode 3, Killing Magic, where Fern and Frieren work to clean up a beach. They stay in the town for a couple of months, and the show really explores how much mothering Fern needs to do. She makes sure Frieren gets up at a reasonable time, that she eats breakfast, that her hair is brushed, and that she's dressed. It is a shocking display of how mature Fern is and how immature Frieren is in turn. Frieren reminisces about behaving the same way with the hero's party, frequently sleeping until noon, much to their annoyance.
ごめん。
おい、
気持ちはわかるけどさ。
それ、普通にブチ切れてますよ。
It's understandable why the hero's party would be so irritated. They have a long journey ahead of them. The earlier they set off, the further they can go before stopping at night, progressing the journey faster. They want to get there, they want to kill the Demon King, but Frieren is used to taking her time traveling. Plus, she's lived in a world with the Demon King for 1,000 years. What's a little bit longer? This moment is an excellent demonstration of a sense of human urgency that Frieren lacks, and this is tied back to her endless pool of time and her longevity. We can understand the party's frustrations. Moreover, it's relatable, but we can also understand Frieren's perspective, or at least we should work to really get at some of the thematic material of the show. This inconsiderate attitude sort of forms the heart of Frieren's immaturity, but this isn't to say she's wholly irresponsible. Throughout the show, Frieren makes good on prior promises to clear out old demons and aid towns plagued by monsters, even 80 years after the agreement was made. When Hyder originally asks Frieren to take Fern on as an apprentice, she refuses because she knows how dangerous the apprentice's life can be. When it comes to issues of teaching magic and combat, Frieren is often one of the most responsible, and mature characters in the show. She handles almost all threats, monsters and demons alike, with a calm ease that displays her martial prowess. In these moments, we really feel that Frieren has lived for 1,000 years, and that she has all of this maturity and experience backing her up. Get her off the battlefield, and that becomes a different story entirely.
人との距離感って何？
ガキ3人だったか。
But these contradictions are part of what makes Frieren such a rich and compelling character. Another great way to examine these ideas of maturity and how the show presents them is by examining Fern, whose maturity is closely correlated with Frieren's. If we return to our killing magic example, we can see that each story beat illustrating Frieren's immaturity shows how mature Fern is. She seems far more mature than the elf throughout the show. Fern is often the voice of reason for the party, managing their finances, keeping everybody on track, and making sure they do the tasks that they might not want to do, but are necessary to ensure their journey goes smoothly.
フリーレン様。何そのどうか。
We can trace the source of Fern's maturity to her childhood, an analysis of which examines how Frieren connects time and maturity and mortality. Fern is a war orphan Hyder adopted late in his life. The loss of her parents gave Fern an acute sense of mortality. When she was young, she decided to become a mage because she understood Hyder would die and wanted to demonstrate that she could take care of herself so he wouldn't die with regrets. Fern dedicated her youth to training. The end result is she's a very powerful mage, and she has demonstrated a material maturity that shows she can manage her finances, she can take care of herself, and maintain a responsible life. Through Fern, Frieren establishes an innate connection between maturity and mortality. Fern embodies that sense of human urgency. She devoted herself to taking care of a task before Hyder's time ran out. The show kind of posits that the more aware one is of their mortality and the overall world around them, kind of the less sheltered they are, the faster they are to mature. Establishing a connection between mortality and maturity shines a little bit more light on Frieren's situation and exposes a little bit more depth of her character, especially when we consider how she has been shown to grow between the time of Himmel's passing in the original journey and her current adventure.
変わったな。お前は人の時間を気にするようなやつじゃなかった。
Aizen's line here sharply contrasts Frieren's present self with the past self that traveled with the hero's journey, illustrating the character growth that occurred in the 80 years separating them. After Himmel's funeral, Frieren resolved to get to know humans better. And she did. We see this in many of her interactions with Fern, perhaps most importantly, her meeting Fern at all. Frieren visited Hyder towards the end of his life because, well, she knew he might have some things he wanted to take care of that he couldn't because he was older, while Frieren, she was as vital as ever because time does not affect her. This is the exact opposite of what she did with Himmel, where she just sort of stayed away and then he died. Learning from her mistakes like this and making good on her promise to get to know people better is a very genuine sign of maturity and character growth. Frieren makes a genuine effort to be considerate of Fern in ways she never did with the hero's party. Yeah, she still oversleeps and all of that, but she does try to get to know Fern. She cried at Himmel's funeral because she never got to know him. She never felt like she knew any of the members of the party she traveled with, so she stresses over trying to find a sweet stop to treat Fern at, and picking out a good birthday present. And even though she doesn't feel confident in what she's done, the effort does touch Fern, and it tells us Frieren has matured. It's also very relevant to note, again, a link between maturity and mortality. What spurred all of Frieren's character growth, and what has made her just a little bit more mature, and that she is more empathetic, Which isn't to say she was never empathetic. Heiter has an excellent quote illustrating how Frieren might struggle with empathy, but that doesn't mean she is not compassionate. But it does demonstrate that link once again, because the thing that makes Frieren mature is a brush with mortality. Not her own, of course, but with Himmel's death. It made her think of time with a slightly more human perspective. While we're talking about Fern, it is important to note that just as Frieren is mature and immature in different ways, Fern also has a sense of immaturity about her. She has that very material, responsible maturity I mentioned about managing finances and kind of keeping things on track, but it doesn't really come from life experience so much as trauma, and we can see some of her immaturity leak out, especially in how she handles her emotions, especially how she handles them with Stark. Stark and Fern have an honestly delightful relationship that's a lot of fun to watch, and a lot of their conflict can be chalked up to them being young, which the show does rightfully celebrate.
大人になって人との距離感が分かるようになると衝突することすら避けるようになる。ああいうのは若者の特権だな。
Of course, we would be remiss to discuss maturity in Frieren's current party without discussing Sign, the most mature member who has joined thus far, even if his time with them was relatively short. Sign's maturity is seen most powerfully when he mediates the conflicts between Stark and Fern. It makes sense they would turn to him for advice over Frieren. Frieren is very vocal about her social awkwardness, and she's not the person you want to ask for advice on these interpersonal matters. But Sign, he is mature in the sense that he understands how people think, and he is able to emphasize with them. He's able to view the way Stark and Fern are acting with startling clarity. He's able to acknowledge that they're just doing stupid things because they are young, without condemning them for it, because they are young. I think it's interesting to consider how Sign seems so much more mature than anybody else in the party. One conversation that adds a lot of context to this happens between Ciri and Frieren. This conversation occurs 1,000 years prior, just after Flame's death. Ciri mentions that because humans have such short lifespans, they don't have the ability to ponder their decisions the way elves do. Elves can let their problems rest for a century or more while they try to figure them out. Hell, the problem might just die out if they wait a century or two. Humans don't have that luxury. That is where the sense of human urgency I've been referencing comes from. If we think about it in this context, and we think about it in relative time, Sign, as a 30-year-old man, has lived more of his life than Frieren, and that's where his lived experience comes from. We have established the idea that Frieren's maturity comes from the sense of loss she felt at Himmel's death. Sign has no loss. His friend, his best friend, went on a 3-year journey 10 years ago. Sign has just lived through more of his life relative to Frieren, which has given him more lived experience in a philosophical sense. And I think this is the source of Sign's maturity. But mortality isn't the only concept Frieren links to maturity. There is another, far more prominent theme, that of regret. And I think by examining the relationship between maturity, regret, and time, we get an even clearer picture of what Frieren wants to communicate with us. If time forms the thematic core of Frieren, then regret is the emotional heart. The whole story is about Frieren trying to overcome her regrets and get some closure with how she interacted with Himmel. Most character arcs center on regret, and even the characters that don't have a prominent regret in their lives are often focusing on living a life that is free of regret. Like many other facets in Frieren, we can tie regret right back to time and its passage, and examining regret gives us a good idea of what the show wants to say in regards to mortality, maturity, and living life. One of Frieren's most intriguing ideas when it comes to regret is its inevitability. The show doesn't just present it as inevitable, but necessary. One of the best examples of this comes when we examine Frieren's initial views on regret prior to Himmel's death. To examine this, we need to look at episode 4, The Land Where Souls Rest, wherein Frieren and Fern search for Flame's notes. During the flashbacks, which show Flame interacting with Frieren shortly after they met, we get to see the scene where Flame leaves the notes that ultimately direct Fern and Frieren to heaven.
お前はいつか大きな過ちを犯し、人を知りたいと考えるようになる。
知ってほしいの先生。かまってちゃん。
Frieren is less convinced than Flame that she will have regret. She has a very fascinating certainty that she knows what the future will be that Flame does not. I think this also correlates a little bit with that whole immaturity thing that we've discussed at a few points. Rather like Sign, Flame is younger in years than Frieren, but she is much more mature, and this oh, you're going to have regrets. No, I won't. That kind of dynamic really strongly suggests that of a child interacting with, a more mature adult. To really understand the implications of this moment and Frieren's thoughts on regret, we need to consider the nature of regret itself, because, like everything else about Frieren as a character, we can tie this back to her longevity and how she perceives time. Regret is the feeling we are left with after we have used our time or performed actions that we no longer approve of. In other words, regret comes from spending time poorly. I think there are two forms of regret. You have your short-term regrets and your long-term regrets. Short-term regrets are minor things. They can come from behaving badly, fighting with a friend, spending surplus money, just little things. They can be easily absolved or even just forgotten about. But long-term regrets are more haunting. They cast shadows over our lives. These are the kinds of regrets that you sweat over at 3 a.m. months or even years after they've occurred. The kind of regrets that trigger all sorts of what-if scenarios playing at the back of your mind. Frieren is far more concerned with these long-term regrets, with how they shape who you are as a person and influence your change and growth over the course of your life. Himmel's death is one such regret for Frieren, something that she will never be able to forget. In its examination of these long-term regrets, Frieren proposes 2 different ways that you can form regrets relating to different points and moments in our lives. Consider your life a chain of events. Each second might be individually weighed the same, but not every moment is weighed equally. There will be big, grand, sweeping, life-defining moments. These could be within your control, like moving out of your parents' house or going to college, or they could be outside your control. The death of a loved one, a tragic accident, meeting the love of your life. The important thing about these defining moments is they represent major turning points in your existence. When you've gone through one of these events, you cannot be the same after as you were before, no matter how much you might want to be.
たった10年一緒に旅しただけだし。
And then there are the moments between. These are the smaller moments that you might not think of much. Just hanging out, reading a book, eating, commuting to work, even just work itself. They don't seem very exciting when you compare them to those big turning points. But you have to remember that those little moments are most of your life. Not every bit of your life is those major turning points unless you're the protagonist in a novel, in which case, good luck. the moments between can be just as impactful for creating regrets as the defining moments of your life. For Frieren, Himmel's death triggered a form of long-term regret, not because of a major turning point in her life, but because of these moments between. Specifically, the fact that she never got to know Himmel. Those little minor moments are how you get to know people, when you see what their favorite foods are, what their favorite color is, and all of those fun little facts, and how they behave. That's when you get to know people, when they grow on you and you grow on them. But Frieren threw all of that aside when she went off on her wanderings and when she devalued their adventure. Frieren's regret is formed by a turning point. Himmel's death does mark one of those defining points in her life, but the source of the regret is not any one action Frieren did or did not take, but the result of a collective inaction, of completely ignoring the moments between. Of course, it would stand to reason that if Frieren represents regret springing from these moments between, that there would be characters in the show who demonstrate the idea of regret coming from the turning points of our lives. The two characters that exemplify this the best are Stark and Sign. Let's start with Sign, who I think is one of the show's strongest character introductions. We first meet Sign drowning in a bottomless swamp, reminiscing on his past regrets while Frieren watches.
底なし沼にはまっちまった。俺はもうおしまいだ。
It perfectly represents who Sign is at this point in the show. A character mired in the past, slowly drowning beneath the weight of their regrets. Sign grew up alongside Guerrilla Warrior, a brash young man who wanted to become an adventurer, inspired by the nameless statue of two heroes in their town. Guerrilla Warrior wanted to become a hero that nobody would ever forget, hence the interesting name, and Sign intended to journey with him as the Goatee Priest. But then Sign overheard a conversation between his brother and Hyder, and when Guerrilla Warrior set off on his adventure, Sign stayed behind out of a sense of duty to his brother, trying to respect the sacrifice he made by not going to the holy city.
そいつから一緒に冒険者にならないかと誘われたんだ。あの時あの手を取っていたら何かが変わっていたんだろうな。
This is an excellent example of a major turning point in a character's life. Sign could have gone with Guerrilla Warrior, or he could have stayed in the village. Either way, his life turned. He would never be the same person. He would either be the adventurer who set off, or he would be the priest who remained. He opposes Frieren thematically in the sense that his regret is formed by a turning point instead of the more minor moments of a life. The day-to-day of Sign's life seems pretty good. He's respected and liked by the villagers. He spends his nights drinking and gambling, which he enjoys. Yet that regret casts a looming shadow that always makes Sign just a little bit sadder than he would have been had he left. He seems content to whittle away his days in his regret until Frieren and his brother show him the way forward.
ザイン、そんなことを考えていたのか。
Stark similarly regrets a major point in his life. He grew up in a village of warriors, but when that village was attacked by monsters, Stark fled instead of standing his ground and fighting. This is the core of his character, the cowardly warrior who has to take great effort to stand up and fight. As we learn more about the situation, it does become clear that Stark's a little hard on himself about this. He was very young when the village was attacked, and his older brother did encourage him to run. If Stark had stayed, the best he could have hoped for was a quick death. And I do believe that his character arc going forward will involve coming to terms with this, with the idea that he is not weak because he lived. But for the purposes of this video, I want to focus on the idea that Stark's regret and Sign's are virtually identical. Both stood at a crossroads, made a choice they didn't like, and that triggered regrets that have had lasting impacts on their lives, on what they do with them, and how they conduct themselves around others. With regret woven so deeply into the fabric of the show, with a character showing how regret can come from the minor moments of our life, with a character or two showing how regrets can come from the major moments of our lives, it stands to reason that there also could be a character who represents how to live a life free of regrets. And there is. That character is none other than Himmel the hero. The journey to End to defeat the Demon King took 10 long years. Much of this was attributed to Himmel's love of complications and meanderings. He left no soul in need of aid, no dungeon unexplored, and when they explored dungeons, he ensured they did so thoroughly, checking every room of every level before conquering them. He helped merchants travel safely, slayed even the most minor of monsters to protect villages, and of course, posed for so many bronze statues. There's no telling how much time Himmel added to the trip, but if there's anything you can say about Himmel the hero, it's that he lived a full life with no regrets. He didn't hesitate to stride towards his destiny of being a hero, even when a legendary sword refused him. He never flinched when it came time to challenge the 7 Sages of Destruction and the Demon King. He fought well and became a hero for it. Yet, Himmel never missed a chance to relax, to chat with his comrades, to share a good meal, to interact with the people they met on the way. Himmel helped everybody, explored everything, left no stone unturned. That adventure might have taken 10 years, but Himmel made sure that he lived them fully and did everything in his power to have a fun adventure worth having. And in the end, Himmel died with a heart full of gratitude and love. He met incredible people on a mere 10-year journey, and those people came together again at the end. They reminisced about old times, and they saw new sights. Himmel was the hero who led the party that killed the Demon King, but he was also the young man who made some excellent friends. Himmel did not waste one moment of his life. Every turning point he took going for the furthest option. He took the most interesting and exciting option, never giving himself a chance to regret them. He savored every single moment between, from the time he embarked on his adventure to the time he returned to the capital city, and by doing so, Himmel the hero stands alone as the only character with no regrets that we've seen in Frieren.
でも楽しかったよ。僕は君たちと冒険ができてよかった。
Now that we understand what Frieren is saying about maturity, now that we have a better idea of what it's saying about regret and how it uses Frieren's perspective on time to express all of these thoughts, I think it's a good chance to wind things down by considering what the show is really trying to say. What does Frieren want us to get out of this story? What does it say to all these mundane souls who aren't Himmel the hero, who can't escape the inevitability of regret? Frieren is told through the past and the present. For every village Frieren, Fern, and Starrick travel through, for every situation they encounter, the show flashes back to a time when the hero's party visited that village, or dealt with the same obstacles. When the show doesn't flash back to the hero's party, it tends to flash back to Frieren's time with Flamme. Through these frequent flashbacks, the show contextualizes Frieren's character. It demonstrates how she's grown, and it reminisces on those moments between, because in many instances, this is not just a narrator giving us backstory. These are Frieren's memories. This is Frieren herself reflecting on the times that she had but never savored the way she should have. The sense of change imparted by these flashbacks and the constant remembrance of those Frieren has lost serves to demonstrate the final piece of what time offers this narrative and gives us an idea of what the show wants to communicate, at least with the portion of the story we have thus far. Eras change. 1,000 years ago, Flamme revolutionized humanity by changing societal opinions about magic. It was once the exclusive domain of demons, but Flamme changed that, working to bring about an era when anybody could use magic. Her impact is immense. She's a mythical hero to the modern day, written about in textbooks with the greatest respect. Frieren saw 1,000 years of war evolve into a peaceful era with the defeat of the Demon King, and the Mage Ciri belongs to an even more distant era, known only as the mythical era that even the demons have forgotten. History seems ready to change again, with Frieren assuring Ciri that Fern is proof that the age of humans has arrived. Time flows ever onward. Our past is fixed. Frieren must live with her regrets about Himmel's death and the consequences of her indifference. Stark can never go back to help his village. Sign will have always spent 10 years apart from Guerrilla Warrior. These regrets are ingrained in their very beings. This paints a rather grim picture, but Frieren is anything but grim. It is a lovely story about the beauty of life and how we can live well. The show does suggest a solution to regrets, a way to move past them, and that is to accept that time flows onward and to embrace its forward momentum. We see this concept incredibly clearly demonstrated through Himmel, but we also see this very well in the very first episode, with the moment that inspires Frieren's character growth and that pushes her onto the path of maturity.
魔法収集の旅か。
それもあるけど、私はもっと人間を知ろうと思う。
What I said previously about our lives being split into minor and major moments can also be applied to narratives. For an adventure show like Frieren, one could call action scenes some of these big turning points. This is incredibly common in the action-adventure genre, though any story worth its writing will also have emotional turning points. For Frieren, it doesn't spend a lot of time on these battles. Many fights are wrapped up for just a few minutes of screen time. Look at how quickly Stark defeated the dragon when they met him, or how easily the party defeated the monsters attracted to the hero's sword. In both examples, the actual fight was inconsequential compared to getting to know Stark, or seeing how Himmel reacted when the hero's sword rejected him. Though some battles, like the fight with Aura or the various trials of the first class mage exam, get episodes of focus, many of the fights in Frieren are similar to the landscapes the characters move through, backdrops upon which the true story plays. There are frequent asides to villages where Frieren performs jobs for silly folk spells. Lots of time gets spent on Stark's and Fern's birthdays. There's always time to enjoy the sunrise, get a meal, or find a hot spring. This is in part a matter of Frieren's perspective. The show focuses on these moments because she wants to. This story is very upfront about being about the journey as much as the destination. While getting to heaven matters, Frieren wants to take this time to savor the moments she spends with her party. It's no longer a mere 10-year adventure. It's just an adventure. Frieren cares about capturing these silly little moments with her friends. She is taking care to avoid making the same mistakes she did that led to the regret she felt at Himmel's death. By avoiding that original mistake, she takes the path sign doesn't that prevents her from getting trapped and mired in her regrets. The means of treating regret Frieren presents is very simple. Move forward. Don't despair at having made the mistake that's left you burdened with regrets, but learn from it. Don't repeat the same mistake. Not only will this lead to a happier life, but you will be able to help other people as you'll mature, because the path to maturity is paved with regrets. Resolving yourself to move past the regrets is the only option, and it's never too late. Look at Sign. He spent 10 years in that village. 10 years he did not spend traveling with Guerrilla Warrior, yet he still set off. He made the choice to stop simmering and sinking in his regrets and to try and live a life that would be free of that mistake. There's one last thing I would like to touch on: the value of companions in the face of regret. Let's think about Himmel for a second. He lived a regret-free life, and I attributed much of that to his actions, which is fair, but we also have to consider the role that his party had in that. Especially at the end, Himmel lived and died so joyously because he got to travel with his party. He got to relive his memories of the 10-year adventure. He specifically says at the end that he's not happy that he killed the Demon King. He's not happy that he became the grand hero. He's happy that he got to journey with these people. Even if he had killed the Demon King, even if he had found his way to that viewing point for the meteor or a shower, Himmel never would have had as much fun if he had gone it alone.
一人だとこんなに静かなんだな。
Frieren's journey to moving past her own regrets came out of a collective effort from people who cared about her over 1,000 years. Flamme left the notes for Frieren to go see heaven because she knew Frieren would have regrets and wanted to help her. But Frieren only sought out those notes because Eisen and Heiter knew she regretted how she felt about Himmel's passing. Heiter studied the texts in the Holy City to uncover a likely area for the notes. Eisen prompted Frieren to find them and helped her search. This collective effort of love and compassion over 1,000 years is what generates this story. It's what gives Frieren hope for absolving her regrets. We see this echoed plenty of other times throughout the show. When Stark is given the opportunity to journey with another party of adventurers, he doesn't because Fern inspired him way back when they first met. That said, while companions are vital to helping pull one out of regret, they cannot do it alone. The choice to move past one's regret must come from oneself. No matter what Eisen or Heiter said, Frieren only grew more empathetic and mature because she resolved to get to know humans better. And only by opening herself up to other people was she able to see Eisen and set the whole chain in motion. Everything that will absolve Frieren of her regrets and make her live a better life will come from that one very important decision. And I think this is important to consider because our regrets also come from our decisions. Frieren regrets not seeing Himmel, and not returning to the capital was an active choice on her part. Sign chose to stay in his village, and so on. The whole solution, as this beginning portion of Frieren Beyond Journey's End proposes to regret, is to embrace life. Be like Himmel, live kindly, offer help freely, surround yourself with incredible companions, leave no dungeon unexplored, no stone unturned, and make sure you have an adventure worth having. And if you do find yourself with regrets, which is rather inevitable, don't despair. Use them as lights, illuminating your path forward. Use them to become a more mature person, better suited to the trials you have yet to face, one who can stand behind the work they've created with pride. Above all else, don't let your life stagnate. Don't become mired in the past and let it trap you. Time flows ever onward, and so must we.
綺麗だ。
Hello everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my Frieren video essay. This was my longest video project to date, and it was quite the undertaking. I don't think I'm going to make another hour-long video anytime soon. This took quite a bit of work, but I really appreciate you watching it. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified for my following videos. The next video we're going to be working on is going to take us to the wonderful world of Studio Ghibli to explore themes of apathy and antipathy in some of their most prominent films, including Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke. Thank you guys again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.